unless this is the first thing you've done since climbing out from under a rock, you're probably aware by now that Formula One has released what it considers to be the 20 fastest drivers of all time. And of course, by all time, they're going back to 1983, which is slightly odd for a championship celebrating the fact that it's 70 years old this year. Ed Straw and Scott Mitchell are here with me, Glenn Freeman, to tear apart this ranking, which we'll put on screen for you now. But before we do that, Scott, and before we, let's face it, jump into the boat, is this just bait, or is there something a bit more to it?
I'm sure it's a legitimate attempt to quantify a method of ranking the fastest drivers ever, and these sort of lists they're laudable to an extent. But there is also going to be an element of baiting people, because once you've got that final list, there's no way you can look at it and say, yeah, this is it. This is definitely the 20 fastest guys in Formula One. So there's an element of going, well, this is what we've come up with. We might as well throw it out to everybody and see how they're getting on. My thoughts were with the F1 social media account admins when the list was released. We've fallen for it, haven't we? Because we're here recording a video talking about it. But you've got to take more than just a pinch of salt with this list.
Yeah, we have fallen for it. And Rob Smedley from F1, in trying to justify the list, said that calculations like these are what help teams determine who they sign to race for them. And that's Rob Smedley, of course, whose last driver lineup at Williams was Lance Stroll and Sergei Sirotkin. Presumably those two were just outside this top 20 that we've got to look at. But Ed, let's jump straight in and start tearing this thing to shreds. Where do you want to start if we're going to start looking at this list and trying to make sense of it?
Well, I think it was a slightly different set of numbers that made that Williams driver decision rather than the pace ones. But the first thing that leaps out at me is Lewis Hamilton up in third place. Former McLaren teammate Heikki Kovalainen in eighth overall. I think it was 10-1 in Hamilton's favour in terms of pole positions. Kovalainen just got the one at Silverstone in 2008. So that one raises quite a significant eyebrow for me.
I think Kovalainen probably benefits from that time he had up against Jarno Trulli, a known one-lap specialist. But by the time he's up against Kovalainen, Trulli's firmly in the twilight of his F1 career and about to head across to a disastrous stint in Formula E as a driver and team owner. So this is a good example actually there of how these sort of like first and secondary connections fall down, because drivers go up against each other at different times. I mean, if you take a look at the list and see that Robert Kubica, for example, is near the tail end of the top 20, well, which version of Robert Kubica? Because the proper version was not the same one who went up against George Russell and got absolutely smashed in the Williams. So it's really difficult to look at that list and take it seriously. Are we really saying that Lewis Hamilton, for example, he might well be slower than Senna and Schumacher? Is he really going to get out-qualified by 0.3 of a second? What's the car? What track is it? How long's the lap? I have all sorts of questions about how they came up with the deficits as much as anything.
Well, another one is you look at it, Ricciardo is ranked below Nico Hülkenberg. Well, the 2019 season at Renault begs to differ. So that's another one where this kind of circular argument where you're comparing driver X with driver Y with driver Z, and one's faster than the other, but then another's faster than the other. It's so difficult to do that, especially with long career spans.
Yeah, and if you look at someone like Senna at the top of this list, and I think Alain Prost sneaks in to the top 20, the rest of it's so heavily weighted towards like the most recent drivers. You've got guys who have been in Formula One for a year or two, like Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc. Got great qualifiers. Leclerc has loads of pole positions. How many of those were strictly, above board pole positions? I don't know. Does the algorithm account for things like that? But there does seem to be a little bit of a weighting towards more recent drivers with very little, longevity and pedigree in Formula One. And when we were talking off air, Glenn, I think you suggested a bit of recency bias, which does seem to stack up when you look at the list.
Yeah, I think the best way to get yourself onto this list was to be a current or very recent Formula One driver by the looks of it. And the fact you've got Senna at the top, Prost in 20th, and none of really their contemporaries anywhere else featuring. So, where's Nigel Mansell and drivers like that who were stars of the same era? Another name, of course, that's missing is Mika Hakkinen, who I understand is nowhere near this top 20, and he's a two-time world champion, no less. So, Ed, we could keep going and going here, and by all means throw another one in if you've got one. But ultimately, it's the fact that we can so easily pick holes in this does that just prove that ultimately these arguments are pointless?
Well, looking at the overall methodology, you have to set a methodology. You put your numbers in, all your facts and variables, and I'm sure they've put in as much as they can. You create your methodology, and whatever it spits out, you have to go with. You can't just look at it and cherry pick the bits you like and don't like. So they're right to go with the list that it comes out with, as well as they've been able to fettle the information. But yeah, you're dealing with far too many intangibles. There's some of the data is a matter of record and exists. Some of the relevant data is lost in time, different car specs between teammates, for example, the different range of drivers' abilities and how good they are at different stages in their career, the different regulations, just to name three of probably the thousands of different things you'd want to factor in. So if you undertake this and say this is going to be a definitive, fully data-driven, fully scientific and accurate representation of who's fastest, it's not going to be. It can't be. It is pointless to try and do that. That said, I would say whenever it comes to this kind of thing, when it comes to weighing up the relative merits of all the great drivers and drivers who you can't compare so directly, the whole point of that is the journey that you're on and the understanding and what you learn from it rather than the outcome. And unfortunately, a system like this removes quite a lot of that journey because it makes it into a much more scientific, algorithm, spreadsheet driven way of doing it. So yeah, in terms of actually doing it as get a definitive answer that can stand for the rest of time and could be tested against reality, which obviously you can't do because you can't put Alan Prost at his peak up against Fernando Alonso at their peak, it is fairly futile.
I've tried to listen and read a bit of what F1's put out in terms of how they put this together, and the more I understand about it, the less I understand about how they've come up with this list. Because one of the things that they seem to have omitted is they seem to have eliminated wet weather qualifying, for example, because they consider that to be they consider that to be a variable that skews the order. But wet weather qualifying is one of the ultimate examples of a driver's pace, and as soon as you start eliminating so-called anomalous laps like that, where do you draw the line? So it's very arbitrary. It's not this machine learning and all of these things that you want to put to it. It's I'm sure it's very clever. I'm sure to someone somewhere they're very proud of it. And once you've got those numbers, I'm sure you can find a way to argue them. Good luck to the person trying to claim that Jarno Trulli and Heikki Kovalainen are two of the 10 fastest Formula One drivers in history. Sorry, not in history, in half of the Formula One World Championships history, because they obviously don't have enough data to do the first 33 seasons.
That's fine. I'm sure there was nobody quick in F1 in the first half of its existence. So there you have it. Maybe it was pointless, but it was a fun debate and we thought we'd film it for you. If you've enjoyed it, hit like underneath this video. Please keep the discussion going in the comments underneath. And hit that subscribe button if usually you prefer your F1 content to be based on something with a little more substance.